everyone to our first virtual landlord event. We had planned to do an in-person one last year and things got kind of crazy. So we thought we'd try the virtual, and then we have some plans for another in-person event in October. First of all, we just wanted to share with all of you who we are and kind of what we do. So we are the Tri-County Housing Coalition, and we have representation from Hillsdale, Jackson, and Lenawee Counties. And we began meeting in January of 2019. Our mission statement is to work collectively to advocate for affordable, accessible, and safe housing. We are comprised of various representation, including housing service providers, government officials, property managers and developers, landlords, and any others that hold an interest in our mission. One of our main goals from the beginning is that we wanted to work closely with landlords after our group got going so that we could support you better and kind of give you some different resources and address some topics that may support you better in the community. We wanted to acknowledge, first of all, also that we understand last year was crazy and unprecedented. We never saw anything like that. So we wanted to really acknowledge all the things that you have done as landlords, because I know, and our group knows that everything that you went through was definitely crazy. And, you know, you helped keep our tenants housed during all that time. So we really want to say thank you for doing that. You know, it's something new that none of us have been through before. And the slides here, we have the agenda. Our first presenter will be Elizabeth Salerno, the Executive Director of Housing Help of Lenawee, and she's going to give us an overview of the new funding that's available to help tenants and landlords. Next, we'll have Laura Remy, the Director of Community Programs at Community Action Agency, who will go through the step-by-step discussion on how to apply for the funding. And then we'll break for questions and answers and then go into resources that we can share with all of you. We'll talk about our October in-person event that we're planning and kind of what that overview will be. And then next slide. And I just wanted to mention that we're recording today's presentation. So if you have to go back and look at it, you'll have access to that. We ask that everyone keep their microphones muted and feel free to put questions in the chat box during the presentation. Feel free to unmute during our question and answer sessions if you'd like to talk. And if you hover over the bottom of your screen, there's the toolbar down there to unmute yourself. And for those of you on the phone, we have you muted right now, but feel free to unmute for questions and answers by pressing *6. I will now turn the presentation over to Elizabeth Salerno.
Thank you. Good morning. All right. So, next slide. So our COVID Emergency Rental Assistance, or SARA, is technically it's COVID relief funding that the state of Michigan received to help renters. The ultimate goal is to stabilize housing for renters and prevent eviction, having an eviction on their record. The Michigan State Housing Development Authority, or MSHDA, has contracted with local agencies throughout the state to administer these funds. Some landlords may know the term. MSHDA pretty much contracted with the local HARAs, so the Housing Assessment Resource Agencies in each community across the state. So those are the agencies that your renters would tend to connect with as like a central starting point if they're in any sort of crisis. These funds are eligible tenants can receive assistance with rent and utilities. Some pieces of this program is very similar to the Eviction Diversion Program, or EDP, which I'm sure many of the landlords have worked with in the past several months. Next slide. So for eligibility, tenants must have income that is at or below 80% of the area median income. They also must either be behind on their rent or their utility payments. They are not required to have a shutoff notice or to have an eviction notice for this. Even just an official notice from the landlord stating that they are behind on their rent payments, or for instance, just even having a bill from a utility company showing that they are behind and in need of getting caught up will suffice. This program also requires that there's a COVID hardship connected to it. So this means for instance, that they can provide proof that they had unemployment since March 13th of 2020 up till now at any point. If they had any reduction in income, for instance, maybe they just had a reduction in hours at work, or if they experienced some other significant increase in costs or other financial hardship due to COVID. An example, for instance, some people with the shutdowns, they couldn't take their children to childcare. So or schools were shut down, so they had to find childcare. So some of those costs increase. So that's just one example of what a hardship could be. It's pretty general when it comes to that, and they just can type up a statement, handwrite a statement, just explaining what difficulties they had since March 13th of 2020. Next slide. For the assistance, it's rent or fees that are incurred after March 13th of 2020. Those who have gone through the eviction diversion program may not obviously have any rent going back that far. However, if somebody maybe was not able to participate in the eviction diversion program and it still has rent owed back to March of last year, it would have to have been incurred after March 13th of 2020. Depending on the amount of income, so the AMI levels, they may be eligible for a little bit more assistance, if they have the lower income. So up to 12 months of rent assistance for tenants that are up to 50% AMI. And those that are up to 80% AMI could be eligible for up to 10 months of rent assistance. The maximum contract rent would be 150% of the HUD fair market rents. What that means is, for example, if the unit, let's say for a 2-bedroom was $500 was the fair market rent, but the rent that the tenant's actually being charged is $600 for that 150%, the tenant portion of that would be $100. The program could look at helping with what that max of that fair market rent is for the number of bedrooms in that unit. Let's see here. So like with the eviction diversion, there are some fees that are also allowable. With this program, it actually allows us to cover up to $400 of any late fees that were incurred since March 13th of 2020 and up to $150 of court costs. The landlord would be expected to waive any fees that are in excess of these amounts. The court costs for this program, MSHDA is requiring that the documentation for these fees come directly from the court, not from the landlord, not from a lawyer. So when going through the court process, it will have to get things directly from there, like the court register, something. The late fees can come directly from a ledger balance from the landlord. Within this program, if you are at the court, the hope is that we would have a conditional dismissal put together in agreement following the program guidelines that the landlord's agreeing to accept payments and that the tenant is also agreeing to comply with the program. The program also has a requirement that, of course, the tenants agree to continue complying with their lease as part of the program. The tenants can receive part of these 12 months and 10 months can also be future rent assistance. So we could possibly assist with getting caught up, as well as potentially, for example, even up to 3 months forward. The maximum amount of forward assistance is, again, all dependent on what their income is. Those with lower income could be eligible for a little bit more assistance than those with higher income. Over here, we have our utility assistance as well. So for the utilities, it is broken out by the number of people in the household. So the chart is there so 1 to 2 persons, they could be eligible, and that would even include for future utility assistance up to $1,500. So there can even be credits on there, obviously, with a future payment. Tenants are also eligible to receive an internet stipend. The internet stipends can go directly through the tenant or potentially even get sent directly to the internet provider. But this is all a one-time assistance. So if someone applies and gets assistance, for instance, now, and they go through the program, they're done with the program. 2-3 months down the road, they're behind again, they cannot apply for this assistance again. It is a one-time assistance within the time frame of this program. However, this program can also work in conjunction with other funding within our communities, such as the Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG, which I'm sure many landlords have probably worked with in the past as well. So if, for instance, this program can't cover all of the expenses and they're eligible for these other funding that the communities have available, they can work together. All right, next slide. So now Laura will take you through the process on how to apply for the funding.
Okay. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So MSHDA has made the application process for these funds all electronic. And so they're asking that everybody apply through their applicant portal. And this first bullet point on the slide has that web address. So it's sierraapp.michigan.gov. And that's where the tenant's going to need to start the process at. We can take paper applications. If we're unable to do an electronic application, we're going to encourage everybody to attempt that electronic application though, because then we have to go back and enter all those paper applications into the system. So it'll be a lot easier if we're just touching everything once and not multiple times. What happens is the tenant is going to start the application there. They're going to enter their name, their email address, and the landlord's email address. So you do have to have an email address to participate. And the tenant may be asking you for that email address so that they can enter it into the system. So once that's entered, the landlord will receive a link in their email letting them know that the tenant is applying, and that link will take the landlord to the Sierra application to enter their part of the application as well. Application has to be signed by both the tenant and the landlord in order for it to be processed. And there's some additional information that's uploaded with that application. Some of that is here on the slide for you to look at, but for the tenant, it's going to be their photo ID, the proof of income for their last 30 days, their COVID hardship letter, which Elizabeth talked about a little bit, utility statements. And then from the landlord, we're going to have a W-9, the ledger that shows what they owe and the breakdown of what they owe, so we can break out what's fees, court costs, rent, and then a lease. If there's no lease in place, there was a verbal lease or the lease is expired, we can work through that with you as long as we have the information that we need to show that the tenant is in the unit and how much the rent is and what the tenant is responsible for and what the landlord is responsible for. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So I will just say so the portal is new. It's going to be new to all of you. It's going to be new to us. The portal went live last week on late in the day on Wednesday. Our staff at both Housing Help of Lenawee and Community Action Agency across the state, we were all trained on the Thursday and Friday last week. And then we just received login information to the system Wednesday this week. So we haven't had a lot of time to get into the system and look at applications and play with it. So it's all very new. This is what you're going to see when you log in. So this is kind of gives you a little bit of information about what it is. And then go ahead and go to the next slide. And this next slide is going to show you what it looks like, where the tenant's going to enter their first and last name, email address, and that information, landlord's email address. And then they submit that. Again, you have to have an email address. So I think most landlords do have one. If not, if you want to participate in the program, we'll have to help you create that email address. Go ahead and go to the next slide. If we do need to do a paper application, MSHDA has all this information on their website. And you can see that here. So there's the green button there that shows you that you can apply online, but to the right-hand side of the screen on the MSHDA page, There's also the landlord application is there, the tenant application is there, some frequently asked questions, information about income guidelines, and as well as the SERA contact list, which will have all your HARA agencies, contact people and email addresses on it. So that's all available on the MSHDA website as well. I think there are staff at both Community Action Agency and Housing Help of Lenawee that would be happy to help landlords or tenants figure out how to get the applications turned in, help with process with uploading documents, that kind of stuff if there's issues. The one thing that is really going to be beneficial about the portal, I think, once it's kind of up and running, is that once you have that, receive that email address, it'll give you a SERA application number. And that application number will allow you to go back in and view where the application is at in process. So you can see, okay, the tenant's turned in all their information and the agency is now processing it, or it's the agency's done processing it, the check has been cut, here's the check number, this is when it went out. So the landlord will be able to view that and see all of that, as well as the tenant, so that that just helps you kind of understand where things are at in the process. The system is supposed to flag evictions. So the tenant it'll ask the tenant if they have an eviction, they'll check yes, and then that will flag it in the system. So those do get pushed ahead in the line for application review by the agencies, so that those aren't put into a queue and then missed along the way, that have a little more urgency than someone that doesn't have that filed. Go to the next slide, please. So this is just our local HARA information for Jackson, Lenawee, and Hillsdale. I think the one thing, the important piece to remember, I think, when you're applying online for landlords is going to be that you want to make sure you sign and initial the application in the spots that are required. Otherwise, it can't be processed. If for some reason as a landlord you choose not to participate in the program, we have had some local landlords that are choosing not to participate. If the tenant is still eligible for assistance, we may still be able to pay the tenant the rental amount that they owe, and they can pay that directly to the landlord. So if we come across that where the landlord is starting the application in the system and then says, I don't think I can agree to all of these terms, or I don't want to sign this application, we'll touch base with you on that, and then may be able to still move forward with the tenant so that back rent can still be taken care of. I think we can go on to the next slide. So this is what this slide is showing, what it's going to look like as the application moves through process in the system. The tenant initiates the application. There is supposed to be an option for landlords to apply on behalf of tenants. I don't know that that's ready in the system yet. We had some landlords this week tell us that they were able to apply for tenants, but I'm not sure if they just filled out the tenant portion or if there was really the option for landlord to apply for tenant for them, but that's also going to be an option. The landlord will get their link to put their information into the application. Based on the address of the tenant, it comes to the appropriate agency. The agency reviews it, makes sure all the pieces are there, it's signed, everything's filled in, all the uploaded documents have been uploaded, all the required documents have been uploaded. It gets passed on to the case manager that will make sure that everything, double check everything is there, determine the eligibility. They'll talk to the landlord about what could be done. If there's any additional late fees that can't be covered, they'll explain all of that. And then it moves on to an approver within the agency that's going to double check everything one more time, approve the financial assistance, and then move it on to the finance department to process checks and get those out. So it's all going to move through electronically. We do all of our pieces through that application portal as well. So everything is done through the portal, which is why it's so important to have people apply directly into that system. Next slide, please. So how about some questions? What might you guys have questions for us on? Don't forget that you're probably muted, so.
Yeah, I just had a question on the for the signatures on the application. Are you able to do those electronically, or is that something tenant will need to print and scan?
Nope, it can all be done electronically. Yep. Yep. So you can sign it electronically and send it through the system that way.
This is Lauren from Legal Services. I'm working with a lot of tenants right now. One thing I've seen so far is they need to verify their email. So I've had a few tell me that they have applied. I can go in and check and I don't see their application. And then they forward me an email that says, click on this link to verify your email address. So there is a step in there. They might think they've submitted everything. They need to check their email, click the link to verify, and then that will pop up in the system.
Yes, that's correct. And I think the landlord does the same thing. It'll ask you just to verify your email so that they know that it's correct. And then you'll get that link to with the SARA number. And an access code, I think, is the other piece that you get with that.
Yeah, and the confusing thing is that at least with this email, they did get the SARA number and the access code in the email asking them to click the link and verify. So they thought they already had an application number and code, but
Yeah.
we couldn't find them any which way until after they had verified. So there is one more step there.
One more step. Yeah, and after you verify, then you have a whole bunch of additional information you have to answer. So it's important to verify.
This is Elizabeth from Housing Health. One thing I want to make sure landlords know as well is, because I know it's created some confusion so far with the program, is even for instance, if a tenant is current on rent and they're stating they don't need any assistance with rent, but they would like to be eligible, see about assistance with past due utilities, the landlord application is still required. MSHDA is requiring that things still be processed from the rental standpoint to be eligible for even the utility assistance, even if a tenant says they don't want any rental assistance. So just so that you are aware, that's the only way they can access that utility assistance as well.
Elizabeth, this is Robin. I just have a quick question. I did have one of my clients apply for like past due utilities. However, it seems that he may have some previous past due utilities, same property. I know, or I'm under the assumption, just because I've heard it happen, you know, from my clients, that they had stated that they get a credit or something if they apply for utilities. I'm just concerned about the back portion of that.
When someone applies for the utility assistance, they'll go through the process. They have to provide documentation of what is owed for the property they are living at.
Okay.
And then it's basically everything gets plugged into the MSHDA worksheet to see exactly what they're eligible for each of their utilities. If what's owed is able to be covered with the maximum allowed with MSHDA, then it might help take care of all the past due balance for that property. If not, then there may not be any future the future utility assistance, because the future is also dependent upon whether or not it's all used up from the past due. If
There's
wrong, Laura, I believe that's how it works, correct? There's the maximum cap. So if the cap is 1,500 and your whole past due is 1,200, then you might potentially have 300 that would be future as a credit.
Well, what I'm thinking is that this gentleman owes his landlord, because his landlord actually took care of it, it is in part of the lease that he pays his own utilities. So I just didn't know if there was a credit, if it could be credit back to the landlord possibly, if it was missed in this dilemma, you know what I mean?
This program does allow, for instance, if the lease says that the utilities are the tenant's responsibility, but in order to prevent the shut off, or because utilities were shut off and the landlord ended up with them back in their name and they've been paying, it is a possibility that the landlord could receive the past due payments it just depends on the situation. We have to review the lease and get all the documentation for that. But it is a potential that if it got put into the landlord's name due to the tenant being unable to pay, that past due utility payments could be paid to the landlord.
Well, that's wonderful. I just have this scenario, which is just kind of popped up in the past day or two. So, and I can provide probably most of the information myself. But I'll get with the landlord on there. I just wasn't sure, you know, it might've been like a missed thing because it should have been in the tenant's name. And then the landlord took care of his own property, that type of thing.
Yep. So, yep. When they do the application, they should be able to note that, and then going through the process, the case managers should be able to figure out the way that it needs to move forward for those utilities.
Okay, so he was, I think, Lenawee County's first SERA application. Will he need to fill another one out?
We can connect after.
Okay, that's cool. I just was kind of wondering because this is just something that came up, but it seems like the funding is very flexible, so that's great.
And when we're looking at utilities, they're looking at all of the utilities that the tenant may have to cover. So it's gas, electric, it could be deliverable fuels, water, sewer. So it's looking at that whole picture of utilities and then allocating funds to where it's most needed, taking care of shutoffs, that kind of stuff. And then if there's money left for the credit, like Elizabeth said, it would get applied to where that most need is, where the highest bills are at.
Okay, thank you.
So to piggyback on that, what happens if you find out you need to modify an application? Something in the initial application was inaccurate or things have changed, or we were finding with EDP when things went from 1 month into a new month, then stuff updated. Is there a way to edit, or we'll just wait to be contacted by a caseworker?
Yeah, I think probably it'll happen during that review process. Or if it's past review and then like, let's say another month has been added on and no decision has been made yet. I believe that the processor will be able to alert the tenant that it needs to be updated, or they'll be able to update it themselves in the system. Do you know, Elizabeth, have you?
My understanding is how the system is supposed to work is the processors themselves, if they've confirmed with the landlord and the tenant that there's information that needs to be updated on the application, that we ourselves should be able to go in and do those edits without making the landlord or tenant go in and do them.
Beautiful.
I'm not sure if that works, but it's supposed to.
Fingers crossed.
We're learning as we go.
Yes.
And then have we talked about the big question? When are people going to get paid and how?
So I know on our end, because while MSHDA had this program kick off on March 15th, none of us have had access to the actual money. However, I know that we now have access to those funds, so we should be able to start cutting checks. So I know from Lenawee's perspective, our goal is one, obviously, to put people through as quickly as possible. So for instance, when people are doing applications, if everything's uploaded that's needed initially, things will be able to be processed really quickly. But once we have a decision, our goal is to cut checks, worst case, within 2 weeks. We usually can cut them sooner, but we usually will issue payment within 2 weeks. I'm not sure what the timeline would be for Hillsdale and Jackson.
So we did, our first round of checks were cut this last week, during this week, I should say. So hopefully those will be going out in the mail today or the latest on Monday. Those are all from paper applications, so not through the portal system. Typically our finance stance is that from the time that decision is made about what we're assisting with, give us 30 days to go through our internal process. I do think with the ceremony, one of the things that we've put in place is some additional finance support so that we can process things faster, just because of the amount of money that's running through this program. So we're hopeful that, again, just like Elizabeth said, that we'll be cutting checks like within a couple weeks of decision making, and they'll be going out. Everything goes through the mail still, so the paper checks through the mail would go out. but you will be able to, as a landlord and as a tenant, and some of the supporting agencies like legal services and Southeastern Dispute Resolution will be able to see in the portal that it's been cut and the check number and that it's en route. So then you know, like, hey, this check went out 2 weeks ago and I still haven't gotten it. You know, we can start talking about maybe we need to void the check and recut or something like that.
And all of the communities, I believe, use the Southeastern Dispute Resolution Services for mediation for those that are at the court already. So that can also help with us with this process to get those conditional dismissals worked out at the court, which in turn can help once those conditional dismissals for those court-ordered evictions are set. That's usually the last piece we're going to need in order to issue payments for those that are at the court. So taking part in those mediation services can help, expedite that process when you're at the court for payment with the program as well.
Any other questions anybody can think of? You guys have our contact information too.
I have a couple of questions.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I'd like to know, so let's say that a tenant is already partially subsidized, let's say through MSHDA, but they're behind on their portion. Would this cover that at all?
Yes, this program can work with those that are already subsidized. They obviously would only be eligible, like you said, for their tenant portion. So yes, this could help with their tenant portion if they're behind.
Okay. Also, is this through MSHDA pretty much, or is this through R2 or?
Yeah, so for the state of Michigan, all the funds for this program is being distributed from MSHDA to all of the local communities. So yes, it's MSHDA funding for us.
And so another question, can a tenant apply, rather than on paper, if they don't have a computer, can they use a smartphone to apply, or do they have to do it by paper if they don't have a way of accessing a computer?
Yeah, as long as they have internet access on their smartphone, the portal is supposed to be smartphone friendly, so they should be able to apply through the smartphone without any issues.
Okay. And another question, what would, in the case where, let's say you have multiple tenants on a lease, so when they apply, they both have to apply, or is it two separate applications, or?
So are you talking like a roommate situation?
Well, let's say the actual lease has two individuals on it, and so then they're behind on the rent. So would they apply together, or would there be two separate applications, or?
Yeah, so since we need a copy of the lease, if the lease has both adults, for instance, there's two adults living together on one lease, then they should apply on one application.
One application. Okay. That was all my questions.
In the system, when the initial person initiates that application, then they can add all of their additional household members. So they would add, any other adults in the home, and then children in the home. All of that would be added in that initial application.
Okay. All right.
Are there any other questions? I think, Tricia, we might be able to move on then.
So I have one last question for you all. Do you want phone calls?
Of course not. No.
So the other question, so then the follow-up is when should people call, right? Because I know your systems are overwhelmed. You want to focus folks on processing the applications and cutting the checks to get this through. But if someone is stuck in the process or hasn't, when should they be calling, I guess?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at any point they have a question, if they're having any problem if they feel like, for instance, if they don't feel like their applications may be going through the system, like, you know, they're having an issue with the online portal, they don't know if it actually took the way they thought. I mean, at any point they're wondering if something actually made it where it needed to be, by all means, they can always call Housing Help. We have somebody at the office Monday through Friday, pretty much from 8 to 4:30. We're always happy to take phone calls. We always tell people, though, if you've already turned everything into us, give us a chance to process the application versus, you know, calling every hour, just because we need that time to process the application. But at any point that they're concerned that they're missing something or they have a question about the process, they're more than welcome to give a call, and we'll be happy to walk them through that.
Yeah, I would also say when they call, if they're leaving a voicemail, that they leave some details about what they're calling about. So like, I applied, but I couldn't upload my documents. Can somebody help me with this? That way we can make sure the right person is getting back to them. That can help them walk through that process. And it's not going to be, oh, let me pass you on to somebody else or something along those lines. We have some Sarah information on our website as well. The CAJLH website. And then with that, there's a contact phone number and there's also an email address. So we set up a specific Rent Assist address that people can email if they have questions too. And that will be checked by all of our Sarah staff daily to try and answer questions through that as well. And I think I would just say, be patient with us because the process is new. We are trying to roll it out as Mishta rolls it out. And so rules are changing, processes are changing on a weekly basis. And then we're also training new staff because we had to bring on new staff in all 3 of our counties across the 2 agencies to make sure that we could cover everything. So be patient with us.
Any other questions? All right, next slide. So first of all, I wanted to talk about the resources. On our last slide, we'll have my email address so everyone can give us contact information. We have a PDF of today's presentation we can send out to you. And we also have county-specific flyers so that we'll have all the contact information of the agencies that can help you with the application. So please make sure that we get your contact information. We wanted to talk a little bit about our October event. So it's going to be at Gene Davis Banquet Hall on Friday, October 29th, starting at 8:30. We're going to have a free hot breakfast, and our goal is to have resources kind of set up around the room so that you can pick up or talk to different agencies in the communities to get information that might help you with tenants and things like that. We do have one guest speaker set up right now. It's Brian Elliott. He's the Advocacy and Accessibility Manager at Disability Connections in Jackson. And he's going to be speaking about ways to add value to your units through accessibility and modifications. We do have other guest speakers that we're thinking of, but we kind of wanted to leave it open to all of you and to get different ideas from you, just because we want to focus on how we can best support you. So if there's things that we can do to educate tenants on being better tenants or budgeting or things in the community, please let us know your ideas, and we kind of want to format off of kind of your feedback. So if you can help with that, we'd really appreciate that. Next slide. And so today we do have 2 $25 Visa gift cards, and they're just random drawing winners. And so please make sure the winners do give us your information in the box to my email so we can make sure we get them to you. And I'm just looking for the winners. It's courtesy of Region 2, Area Agency on Aging.
In both the chat and your email.
Yes. I'm trying. Hold on. We have some random drawings here. Okay, so our first winner is Robert Cannon. And our second winner is Tiffany Snellenberger. I hope I said that right. So congratulations on those, and we'll make sure that we get your contact information and get those out to you. And next slide. So we wanted to make sure that we wanted to say thank you first of all, and if you have questions after the presentation, please feel free to reach out to us. Our coalition does meet every month, and right now it's by Zoom. So if anyone would like to join us, please let us know, and we can get you an invite to those meetings also. It's always been our goal since the beginning to have landlords be a part of that group so we can best support you and your needs in the community, because we know being a landlord is probably about as hard as being a housing provider, service provider. So, the best, what we can do to best support you is what we're looking for. So we wanted to thank everyone for attending today, and my email is there for resources and just some contact information. It's tricia.commet@r2aaa.net. And on Monday, we'll be doing a follow-up survey with all of you, along with sending out the resources and the PDF and things like that. So we hope to see everyone in October, if not sooner. And I'll leave it open for more questions if anyone has anything.
Tricia, do you want me to go ahead and launch the poll?
Oh, yep, please.
You're going to have, well, and those of you on the phone won't be able to see, but those of you that have a screen, you're going to have some poll questions pop up on the screen. If you wouldn't mind answering those really quickly for us, we would appreciate that. Can you see them? Okay, I see. I see responses now. I'll give you just a few more seconds if you want to pop your answer in there. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it out, and I will share the results. Can you see them? So great, we had 100% found that information was helpful, and we have a request for additional events. So we had 7 out of 8 said 4 times per year. We could do something like this, similar to this, or 2 times per year. So great, thank you for answering those.
Any other questions? Thank you, Angie. All right, well, thank you everyone for everything that you do to help us, and hopefully we can work together and better help you to support the tenants that you're renting to. And please feel free to reach out, like I said, to my email, and we'll get that contact information and a follow-up survey out on Monday. Thank you.
Thanks.